loud, and
Okay.
I'm going to, I noticed we had a couple more admits.
Yeah, I'll watch the waiting room if you want to do announcements.
All right, I'm going to welcome everybody. I can't remember what our final number was, Kristen, 20, 27, 21?
No, it got up in the 30s.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, we're at early 20s here. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to the February San Luis Obispo chapter general meeting. And I think it's going to be a really great meeting tonight. I'm Melissa Mooney, the president of the chapter, and Kristen, our vice president, is here tonight. And I'm hoping that I'm sure there are other members of our board here tonight also. Feel free to pop up and say hello at some point in time if you choose to. I have just a couple of announcements. Most of you know this, but for those who aren't on the board or who aren't members, you probably know that our field trips are still on hold for the time being due to the coronavirus issues. I did want to point out that our conservation squad, as David Chipping calls them, is hard at work on reviewing the Oceano Dunes Public Works project. And we're gearing up for reviewing the Dana Reserve project in Nipomo. If you're interested in that, you can contact either myself or David Chipping. Our emails are in the newsletter on the website, so you can contact either one of us about that. The online plant sale for March, we're going to have an online plant sale in March, and the pickup date, I believe, Dave Krause, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the pickup date is March 20th.
That's correct.
Okay, great. And so that'll be happening in March. And then next week we have a board meeting to talk about plans for at least the next 6 months. I don't know if we're going to be able to plan for the year because of so many unknowns, but we'll at least talk about the next 3 to 6 months. So those are some announcements for what's going on for the near term. Does anybody else have any quick announcements before we actually get started with the program? Hearing none, I will then. Remember to mute yourselves. I think we've all sort of done this enough times that we know the exercise now. Remember to mute yourselves and play around with your view options depending on what you do or do not want to see. And I'll turn it over to Kristen and let her introduce our speaker for tonight. All right, Kristen.
Thanks for that, Melissa. We actually have a really awesome view presentation tonight. I've never seen this before, but our awesome speaker, Cath, has her screen shared with the ability to actually still see her in the corner. So I hope you all enjoy that as much as I did. That's great. So yeah, just good evening, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I think this is year 368 of the coronavirus pandemic, and I sincerely hope everyone is doing well. It's good to see some of your faces, and I'm glad you're all still able to participate and join us in these monthly seminars, which we're really excited. We are in for a treat tonight. Some of you heard our chit chat as we were getting going, and I'm so excited for this talk, so I'm going to jump right in. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Cath Kleier. Dr. Kleier is currently serving as the Associate Dean of our very own College of Ag, Food, and Environmental Sciences at Cal Poly. She's been doing that since just this past fall. Once I got it. And prior to that, she was a professor of biology at Regis University in Denver, Colorado. She did her undergraduate studies in Boulder, Colorado, her master's work at Oregon State University, and her PhD in UCLA. So quite a tour of the West Coast. But beyond her West Coast adventures here in the States, and this is where it gets really exciting, Dr. Kleier was awarded a National Geographic Waitt Foundation grant in 2011. And she used that to study the rare giant alpine cushion plant, Azarella compacta in northern Chile. Say that 5 times fast. And then after that, in 2013, she conducted research as a visiting Fulbright Scholar in the Botany Department at the University of Otago in Dunedin, I think I said that wrong, in New Zealand, where she investigated facilitation, which is a concept of plants helping other plants, in the alpine cushion plant genus Raoulia. We'll see how bad I butchered that. I got a thumbs up, that's good. So I hope you are all prepared for a little adventure tonight as we hear about some of these international botanical wonders. I welcome you and I warmly thank you for being here tonight, Dr. Kleier. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Kristen, and thanks for that introduction. Apologies to Nishi, because this is a really similar talk to one he's seen pretty recently at the Cal Poly Biology Department. This is not all the work, this is just some of the work, and this is from Colorado and New Zealand. Let's just get started. I'm figuring that a lot of you know what a cushion plant is, but I threw in this slide so we can see some cushion plants of the world. We got Colorado, we got Tasmania, we got New Zealand, this is Chile, and this is actually the roof of the Metropolitan Contemporary Art Museum in Denver, Colorado. That's my mom. Hi, Mom. And so cushion plants are not just really cool in nature, but they're cool for landscape architecture too. So I don't know, I just love the form. That's how I got into these guys. I just think they're really cool. But let's look a little more at them from a biological perspective. So I took this picture, I actually took it from a sign. So there was some signage at where was I? I was on the Alpine in Colorado. Yeah, green roofs. Woo! Yeah, and I saw this sort of, oh, hey, Layla. So I saw this picture and it had this beautiful cartoon of this moss Campyon. So this actually grows in California. It also grows all the way down to Arizona and all the way up to Canada and actually across to Ireland. I've actually seen it over there. It's same species. So circumboreal distribution around the North Pole. And this lovely cartoon is just saying, considered a fast growing alpine plant, and we'll talk about what that means. Lots of blooming, this cushiony form protects new growth by allowing wind to flow smoothly over the plant. A tenacious taproot seeks moisture from the rocky soil and anchors the plant from the wind. The plants you see are over 100 years old, and that makes it a fast growing species. So that's pretty cool. So you find this is kind of what cushion plants do. They provide cushion or temperature stability, increased moisture, more soil quality and quantity, protection from the wind. It's really a great place for other seeds to germinate within. And so we're going to talk about that as the concept of facilitation, which I'll get into in just a minute. I get asked all the time, are cushion plants confined to one particular family? And they're not. So this is a great example of convergent evolution. You might remember from general biology, bird wing, bat wing. Birds are birds, bats are mammals. They're not related, but they both have wings. Here's my wings for you guys. And so cushion plant, when you say cushion plant, it's like saying shrub. It's just a growth form and it exists in a lot of different families. Okay. So we got some idea of what cushion plants are. I'd also like to say they're so famous, they have their own website and their own database. So here it is, you can check it out. Of course, all the plants I'm going to tell you about are in this database. And this is just taken from a paper that came out in 2014 that was revisiting this earlier paper by some Germans who were sort of looking at the overall growth form and sort of really came up with this idea of calling these kinds of plants cushion plants. Of course, that's not their name in German, and I'm not even going to try to say it because I will. My German's not very good. But here you can see it's really a lot of species. It's a lot of different genera, lots of different families. So we're not talking about, just a few random plants here. It's pretty cool stuff. So Kristen mentioned my study species from my dissertation. This is Azorella Compacta. And even though I'm not going to share a lot of the science with you about this plant, I just wanted to show you this picture. I'm standing at about 15,200 feet, so above 5,000 meters. Well, maybe not that high, more like 4,000 meters. And so these plants, it's actually very rocky, sandy soil here. And the volcanoes in the back are actually in Bolivia. So this is right on the Chilean-Bolivian border. So from that work, I really just looked at where they like to live, their microsite requirements. Hey, they like to live near rocks. They also like to grow on the north-facing slope. Now in the southern hemisphere, the north-facing slope is the equator-facing slope. So this is the warmer slope. I also just looked at their population structure and their overall growth. So that was pretty great to see. Let's see, sorry, with the chat gets in the way of my forwards and backwards buttons. I figured it out. Okay. So this is a really large specimen. And so I don't know now, somebody is going to ask me afterwards if I know whether this is one individual or a lot of different individuals. I don't know. You probably need to do genetic studies. To try to dig these things up really requires a chainsaw or a backhoe. And that's, you know, this is a World Heritage Site, so I wouldn't really want to go digging around in there. But wow, is that massive? And you can see that really rocky soil that they like to live in. So that's pretty cool. That's what I went to New Zealand for, or that's what I went to Chile for the most recent time. Really interested in growth rates. Somebody's going to ask me how fast these things grow. You know, it varies a lot. They'll go for years without growing at all. So basically, you know, what I measured over 14 years was 2 centimeters. They averaged 2 centimeters of growth. So basically that means these plants are thousands of years old. But actually quantifying their exact age, we still need some more research. And so I'm working with the USGS on some carbon dating for these plants. So that's going to be kind of fun. So then, because of that, fast forward, I eventually got to go to New Zealand, where I got to work with this beauty. And some of you are squinting because you're like, wait, is that a plant or a rock? And yeah, it's both. There are rocks. Here's a rock, but here's a plant. And so it's pretty cool that these things really do kind of look like rocks. The Kiwis, the New Zealanders, they call these plants vegetable sheep. They have a lot of different species in this Raoulia genus. They call them vegetable sheep because, of course, New Zealand has more sheep than people. So sheep are very common there, but also because they're very woolly. They have sort of a lot of hairs on the leaves. And these hairs are there to keep them warm, but also maybe as a sunscreen and also to prevent water loss from the leaves. So kind of cool. And this is when I first started to look at facilitation. And so this article was about 3 species on South Island of Raoulia. And so if we think about what facilitation is, this is just sort of a picture. This is actually, we're back in Colorado now. And so this is the plant that we were talking about before, Selene acalis, moss campion. And you can see there's other plants growing right out of the canopy. And so this is exactly what we mean when we're talking about facilitation. And so, you know, this is clearly good for the plants that are growing there. There's really not a lot of work yet to determine if this is bad for the cushion. It doesn't really seem to be. It seems that they can sort of cohabitate, but there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of, well, are there plants that, you know, prefer to grow in cushions? Are there obligate cushion seeders? I haven't seen any yet, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And so it's just really interesting to think about. We know a lot about competition in biology, but I think we hear a lot less about this idea of facilitation. Okay, and then as I mentioned before, you do find cushion plants in coastal areas. So this is actually on the cliffs of Moher in Ireland. And so you can see this is a cushion plant growing here. This is, I think, a species of Arenaria, but it looks to me like Arenaria meridima, but I'm not gonna know. If you think it's something else, I might believe you. Okay, so why am I interested in cushion plants in Colorado, aside from their overall beauty and the fact that these flowers actually smell really great? If you've never gotten on your belly and put your nose right into one of the canopies of these things, they are really pretty amazing. They're good models. They're good little like mini ecosystems. a botanist I know, Christian Corner, actually described these as little compost heaps. And so there's a lot going on in this little tiny cushion. And so you could really look at a lot of different interactions here. So that's pretty neat. And then, of course, I'm interested in this idea of facilitation. And then I'm also curious, are they ecosystem engineers? So I'm going to unpack that idea for you just a little bit. The classic ecosystem engineer is a beaver. So a beaver engineers the environment in which it lives. It builds dams and creates a whole new ecosystem. I mean, clearly humans do that as well, but you know, we don't count, right? We're not really, as botanists, we're not really interested in us. So, you know, what are the plants though that are doing this to a large extent, that are changing the environment around them? So that's the idea of ecosystem engineer. And if they're doing that, are they good for alpine restoration? What about alpine restoration, you may ask? Well, to illustrate a point, my grad student, Rachel Krebs, who has since moved on and is now an environmental consultant, we're standing on the highest point in Colorado. This is Mount Elbert, as you can see, it's 14,433 feet. Now look, we didn't even make this sign. That sign was up there, and that sign was up there because lots of people like to climb the 14ers. It's a pastime for a lot of Coloradans, but also a lot of, as we fondly call them, flatlanders, people that come from all over to climb the Colorado 14ers. There are lots of Colorado 14ers. There's about 53 of them, depending on how you want to count. Some of them are climbed an incredible amount. So, you know, when people ask what's the easiest one, I would say it's probably this one, Bierstadt. And you can see that in one summer, now this 2017 data, I would harbor a guess that it's actually much higher than that now. So in total hiker use days, we're looking at 40,000, somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 hikers. And so, you know, these are not sidewalks that people are walking on. These are wilderness areas, and these are trails. And what I have to let you know about this is that a lot of these trails up these 14ers were started by mountaineers. And if you know anything about mountaineers, what they really like to do is just go straight up the side of a peak. And so what you end up with are trails that get fairly eroded. And so enter this group, the Colorado 14ers Initiative, and their goal is to rebuild the trails up the 14,000 foot mountains so that they are kind of like wilderness sidewalks. They make them so they are, as we affectionately call them, bomb-proof. And so they were doing some work on Mount Yale, and you can see I've put this in red here. And as you can see, Mount Yale is maybe a moderately climbed mountain. So here's Mount Yale, here's a picture. This doesn't come across as well in the Zoom, but maybe you can see there's this sort of parade of people going up this trail. And so in 2015, it was estimated that 7,000 to 10,000 people attempted the summit. And so that's a lot of people going up here. And what that means is that you get trails that look like this. This is not a Jeep trail. This is the Mount Yale Trail. This is the old trail. The Colorado 14ers Initiative came in, they closed this trail, and they built a new trail that wasn't straight up and down the fall line. So if you're looking at this, you'll notice there's not a lot of switchbacks back and forth. You among us who are hikers will recognize that, that doesn't look like a very good trail. That's because it isn't. It wasn't built to withstand that many people. So you get this widening of the trail, you get these valleys, and over time that means water pools, you get these little mini lakes, and this can just cause lots and lots of erosion, which is not great for the plants that are growing by the trail. And of course, any plants that were growing next to the trail die, and then you get this rutting, which just makes it worse, and you basically get a positive feedback loop. So this is what the Colorado 14ers Initiative does. As I said before, they build these really bomber trails, and you may not like this aesthetically, but I'll tell you what, this prevents people from going off trail. Nobody wants to be over here, and you don't want to be in the willows, and these nice steps are not going to erode. And so here you can see a little sign that says this part of the trail is closed. And so that's what I was interested in. So we were looking at the revegetation of an old trail that began in 2011. And so I just told you about how the public creates social trails. I told you about the Colorado 14ers initiative. When I took a group of students up to volunteer on this particular project, they said, don't transplant the cushions. And I said, okay, well, why? And they're like, well, we're not really sure, but it doesn't seem like a good idea. But some people had already transplanted the cushions. So this was an opportunity to do some observational work. So this is kind of what it looks like here. You can see there are vegetation plugs. So basically all that happens is we take a shovel, we dig out a piece of turf, and we stick it in the old trail, and we basically hope for the best. And I was skeptical of this method. I thought, are you kidding me? We're up in the Alpine. These things are never going to survive. And so that's a little trailer of what's to come. But a lot of them did. So here you can see this is what the trail looked like in 2017, and this is 2012. So you can see there's some filling in that's happening. This isn't exactly the same spot, but it's looking a bit better. So I asked some questions here. How would cushion survival compare to non-cushion survival? And are larger cushions better facilitators? And is there a difference in survivorship with elevation? It could be that the higher you go, the more stressful it is, so the plants don't survive. But it could also be that the lower you go, maybe it's not quite as, the higher you go, it might be more wet, because that generally happens in mountains. So that might actually be better. So we had some very basic general questions. These are the methods that I used to determine whether or not facilitation was happening in these plants. And so we used a method that was started by some Asian scientists in China, and they basically just took a hoop and they would put it on the cushion and count the number of plants in that hoop, and then they'd sort of toss it within a meter of the plant and then count the number of species in the hoop again. So we did this, we did some other things. You can read that here. Let's look at the important data. Oh, let's just ooh and ah about my day at the office. So there it was, my field sites. This is the Collegiate Peak Wilderness. It's right in the middle of Colorado. I could have given you all a map right in the central part of the Rockies. So survivorship with elevation, this is just a simple regression. So as you go up in elevation, it looks like survivorship might be increasing, but this is 2012. Lo and behold, when we looked at it again in 2015, it looked like higher elevation plants were dying. Okay, so now why would I do this to you? Why would I give you two different slides that are showing you two different things? Because it's complicated. And that's the thing I always like to share with people, like botany and ecology, it's not rocket science. It's actually more complicated because there are no hard and fast rules for a lot of this stuff. There could have been so many reasons for this. They could have survived well that particular year because of environmental factors. It could have been that the longer time since transplanting was causing them to die. We don't know. So I just throw that in there to tell you it's complicated. All right, what we did find though is that cushion plants seem to survive fairly well, maybe even better than, definitely could have been snow levels, lots of reasons why it could have been. So we did see that the cushion plants seem to be doing pretty well. This is in 2015 when you compare cushion plants versus just grass plugs. All right, so this was looking promising, 2015. And then cushion facilitation, are larger cushions better facilitators? Yeah, it looks like they are. I mean, this is just kind of a species area rule as well. You've got more area, so you might expect that they would be better facilitators, but that was sort of interesting. And so, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I had some conclusions. Survivorship didn't seem to change with elevation. Cushion plants seem to have pretty good survival rates when planted with other growth forms. Facilitation seems to increase with an increase in cushion. And I was thinking maybe we should consider cushion plants because, if they're doing all this facilitating, maybe they'd be great for planting in restoration efforts. And then I must have taken 2016 off and was self-congratulatory because I didn't collect data that year. But then I got a new grad student. She's like, I'm really curious what's happening up there. I'm like, okay, great. I hadn't written any papers yet, so that was good. We went up there and wow, everything was dead. It was really surprising to me. So, I'm guessing that the fibrous roots allowed survival for 4 or 5 years, but then no more, because you definitely can't get all the taproot when you do the transplanting. And clearly over time that had an effect. Now, I know you're Californians and you're like, hey, there was a fire. No, there were no fires. I mean, we would have known. And this is the Alpine in Colorado. It very rarely burns. There were no fires around this area. And so this was just, dried up, shriveled plants. So that was really interesting. And so after, then we went back in 2018 though, because, I was like, well, okay, tried to pull myself together, like, okay, what's going on up here? This is interesting story. And what we noticed that year was a lot of recruits. And I know this is a recruit because this wattle, this sort of erosion prevention bale here in plastic wrap, if you can see that, is actually growing a small cushion plant in it. So this is 7 years old. This is a relatively fast growing one. And so this is clearly this is clearly a recruit into the trail. So then we started counting recruits and we found out, oh, wow, look, the trail is actually recruiting a lot of cushions. So this was pretty cool because no one had really figured out whether or not these things can just sort of move in recruitment wise. And it looks like they can. So there's really no need to transplant them. It just takes a long time. So then now here's the pretty part. Now for all of you who hate data and are like, oh my God, if I see another graph, I'm gonna puke. Here are the pretty plant parts. So this is Minuardia rubella, so reddish sandwort. I really love this. You can barely see it, but there's these cute little dots right on the edge of the petals in this Minuardia. So just a really pretty plant. This is Minuardia obtusifolia or alpine stitchwort. Again, a lovely plant, and you can sort of see those little dots if you get up really close to them. This is our old friend Moss Campyon, the Selenia caulis, and look, it's even facilitating as this plant does. Next, this is one of my favorites, Trifolium nanum dwarf clover, and it really does look like a clover, but it gets this lovely, lovely cushion form to it. So it's really, really quite nice. Phlox condensata, and if you've never smelled phlox growing, you really got to get your nose into it, but it has just a wonderful scent. So great plant. This Perinekia pulvinata, this really is nail wort. I mean, of course, the Old English term wart in this case does not mean pre-beer, it refers to plant. And it really is so tough, you almost need a nail to drive into it. We didn't find a lot of these within the restored trail. So this kind of tells me that perhaps nailwort doesn't recruit as well as some of the other cushion plants, but it was still common in this area. So I just thought you'd like that little foray into the players in this particular area. And so my conclusions for Colorado in 2018 are that cushions are not really great for transplanting. It turns out the Colorado 14ers initiative was right, but now we have some idea why that might be. Cushions do seem to facilitate the growth of other plants better than grasses. And I didn't share that data with you, but it's pretty compelling that they are actually better facilitators than just the plain grass plugs. The old trails provide good habitat for cushions to get established. And this is great because many are pioneer species. So the pioneer species just is the first species to come into an area. And so that's really a great thing for trying to restore an area as well. And then, alpine recovery takes a long time, 7 years and counting. And, I'd be curious to talk with you after the talk about this. Don't worry, it's not over yet. There's still a few more slides from New Zealand. But I'm curious about the sort of similarities between chaparral restoration and alpine restoration, because there's a lot of similarities, a reduced growing season, a time that's right to grow and a time that really isn't right to grow. And so I'm curious about restoration efforts around SLO. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about Tongariro National Park on North Island, New Zealand. And I should have said kia ora when I started. That was very rude of me. Hi, kia ora. This is my study species there, Raoulia alboceracea. And this work, now I know if you know New Zealand at all, everyone knows that the South Island is where all the mountains are. And that's not quite true. It's definitely where the Southern Alps are, but there are some large volcanoes on the North Island. And so because I had studied on the South Island before, this time I went back and went to the North Island. So this is the North Island, here's Auckland. And then right in the middle here is Tongariro National Park. And so it's part of the Taupo volcano zone. And my work was on Mount Ruapehu, which last erupted in 2007, as it says here, was the last big eruption. There was a couple of what they call them fondly burps and hiccups in 2017. But there's also a ski field on this mountain. So here is the ski lodge. It's a little different than we think of. It's not exactly Tahoe, but it's really cool. And they've got one lift and you can ski all over the place. It's really kind of a neat setup. You can also see Mount Nangarhoe in the distance. This is the Mount Doom for those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans. So, but its Maori name is Mount Nangarhoe. And so my questions in going back to New Zealand, and by the way, I went there right before lockdown, so this was February 2020. I wanted to know if Raoulia alboceracea facilitated other plants. There again, I'm interested in this question of facilitation. Wanted to know if larger plants facilitate more. Again, I'm just trying to get at this idea of ecosystem engineering. And I would suspect that larger plants would change their immediate ecosystem more than would smaller plants. I was curious about this idea of temperatures and soil compaction, and I'll get to those when I talk about them. And I wanted to know if there was a difference in facilitation between high elevation and low elevation, and then whether or not Raoulia alboceracea was going to be a pioneer species. So you'll recall from the earlier talk, or the earlier part of the talk in Colorado, that I had this sort of hoop method, and I was all set to go to New Zealand and use this hoop method. And I tried it and it just wasn't working at all. And the reason it wasn't working is because there's just so few plants. And you can just see this is, one of the study sites, and we were just ending up with so many zeros. And I was afraid that all these zeros were just going to really wreak havoc on the data for you statisticians in the room. This was really not going to be good. And so I decided that we needed a different method. So instead, we just counted everything within a meter square. The we, by the way, is Jules Millen, who is an honor student at Victoria University, was helping me with this. So we just counted all the plants in the meter square and then noted whether or not they were growing in the cushion plant. So this is kind of what it looks like. So like I said, we're on Mount Ruapehu. This is the higher elevation site. If you squint, you can see these are the Raoulia here, and they just look like little white spots on the ground, but these are the cushions. And so, the idea of a cushion, it's not quite as moundy here, but it's still doing a lot of the things that the Colorado cushions were doing. This is the lower elevation site here. And again, you got to kind of squint, but there they are. They're definitely there. Different soils, clearly. So we're going to expect some differences here. Rocky soils up high, sandier soils down low. So really pretty interesting. Still a lot of species overlap, though. A lot of a similar grass growing high and growing low, and a lot of other similarities in the flora. So that was pretty interesting. This is one of those. This was Gaultheria colonsoi, or snowberry. I put this one in because it's probably like the only plant that you would recognize, because we do have Gaultheria here in North America, but a lot of the other New Zealand plants we don't have here. 80% of the New Zealand flora is endemic, so not found anywhere else, including the Raoulia genus. So it's really pretty cool. So does Raoulia alboceracea facilitate other plants? And so these are box and whisker plots, and these letters across the top indicate statistical significance. So A is different from B, so clearly letter-wise. So that just means that these two are statistically different from each other. So A and C, not the same, so these are different. A and D, not the same, so these are different. So everything's different over here. So this is, if we're looking at just the plant count, so just the number of plants, and this is the high elevation site inside the cushion. And you can see this is where we found the biggest number of plants. So what we think about this in ecology is that these species are probably acting as drivers, meaning they're sort of driving the rest of the ecosystem, because you find more plants within the cushions up high than you do anywhere else. So that's pretty neat. And then when we compare the lower site, we see that we've got still more plants than outside of the cushion, but not nearly as many as the high site. And again, A, C, these are statistically significantly different. So fairly interesting. So that's just plant count. If we look at plant cover, so this is sort of a percentage, and it's estimated. This is just a visual estimate of percent cover. We see a similar trend, but not quite as different. So now we see that inside the cushions have more percent cover, but there's no difference between the high elevation site and the low elevation site, and no difference between the high elevation site and low elevation site if you're outside of the cushion. So to answer our question, yes, it does look like they're facilitating other plants. It looks like that relationship is most pronounced at the high site. So it's pretty interesting. Do larger cushions facilitate more? Maybe. It certainly didn't look to be as strong as some of the other data that we saw when we were looking on South Island. So that's probably because there's not a huge variation in the size of these plants. They don't get that big. They're not like the giant cushions on the South Island. They're more like sort of Colorado-sized cushions. So you might be able to make an argument for this, but we don't really even want to make that argument, because this would mean that larger plants have fewer facilitating species. So not so much here. Okay, so plants in the meter square plot though. So this is number of plants in the plot, and this is the cushion size. Now here, I'm going for this idea of ecosystem engineering, right? If you've got a cushion and it's big, is it doing something to the environment around it that is causing other species or allowing other species to flourish, to germinate, to grow? And it looks like it might be. So here we're seeing an R squared of 0.30. So that essentially means that this is, driving maybe 30% of the variation in the data here. That's pretty loose, but it definitely is a trend that might be worth looking at. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And the reason I think this is happening, the reason I think that cushions are driving the ecosystem here, is because they're stabilizing these sandy soils. So we did this by looking at penetration. So penetration is on the right here, and this is temperature on the left. And so what we see is that at the higher site in the cushion, the soil is actually more compacted. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, whoa, compacted soil, that's really bad. Like, yeah, it's super bad if you're gonna run an ATV over it all the time. But here, when we've got a really sandy soil, you gotta have something to hold the water in. And so the cushions are actually compacting the soil a bit, and this is actually good. At least that's my argument. And so we're actually seeing a stronger, a more stable soil when we're in the cushion, both at the high elevation and at the low elevation. And so again, you're looking at the letters here, they're different. This is statistically different. And then over here, for temperature, the other sort of question that I had, maybe these cushions are providing a lot of temperature stability that the ecosystem isn't otherwise experiencing. And this, may be the case. We definitely got cooler temperatures in the cushion. So again, this is low elevation in the cushion. And we can see that this is, in fact, a lower temperature, so it's cooler. And that's good. These soils are really dark. And so the lower elevation gets a lot hotter than the higher elevation just because of adiabatic cooling. So it's cooler up high and warmer down lower. And so these soils, because they're so dark, they radiate all this heat. And so the surface soil temperature is really hot, unless you're in a cushion, and then it's quite a bit cooler. So these are two of the trends that could be driving this really interesting ecosystem engineering idea. And then the last thing we looked at down in New Zealand, down under, was whether or not these Raoulia were pioneer species. And so a pioneer species is going to be the first species to come in. And so you get in New Zealand what they call lahars. So this is probably a lahar where the lava at one point ran out of the, and it doesn't have to be lava, it can also be like sort of mudslides and lots of other things that sort of scour the earth, and you get these areas that they look sort of blown out. And they're really, really sandy, but you can see there's some patches of Raoulia growing here. There's also some person has driven through here, which is sort of sad, but that's, you know, what happens. It happens everywhere, even in New Zealand. And so we noticed that it really seemed like the only plant that would grow here was this sort of grass, this one other shrub, and then the Raoulia. So we set out to quantify that. And so this is looking at all the species we noticed down there, and you can see Raoulia are definitely the most in terms of count and the most in terms of total cover. So it looks like, again, Raoulia could be driving this pattern of plants coming in. So that was pretty interesting to me as well. And so some conclusions from Tongariro. The hoop analysis that worked for in Colorado was insufficient for a community with less cover. And you know, you do get cushions in coastal areas and in desert areas. So having a different way of quantifying facilitation is really important. Raoulia did show facilitation at high and low sites, so we couldn't support this idea of the stress gradient hypothesis. And I didn't really go into that with you, but it's essentially the idea that, you know, the more stressful conditions are, the more you're going to need to facilitate. But we didn't find that in New Zealand, probably because you know, these areas are not super water starved. It looks like they're water starved, but they're really not. It's just because of the soils. So we also found that Raoulia had cooler temperatures at the lower site, and that Raoulia seemed to stabilize the soils at both sites, which was really great. And then it's likely that Raoulia are acting as pioneer species. So they really do seem to be some of the first species that come in. So that was pretty interesting as well. So I told you earlier on that that I was going to do some work with Yareta again in South America. So I'm working with USGS to try and do some carbon-14 dating. So we've got a paper in review right now about that. So that was pretty cool. And it basically just sort of quantifies using carbon-14 data, the same data that I found, only we were looking at plants in Peru, which for some reason were growing just a little bit faster than these ones in Chile. They're a little bit lower elevation and probably a little more water. So that's pretty interesting. I intend to go back to Colorado at some point just to look at the longer term recruit survival in that old trail. We don't really know a lot about survivorship curves on cushion plants because they're slow growing, and it's sort of hard to look at those things. And I'm just sort of generally interested in ecosystem engineering of cushions and subshrubs and soils generally. And like I said, I have a lot of questions for you all about ecological restoration, particularly around SLO. And I purposely made this a short talk so that we could have some good conversation. So I hope you'll humor me. So thanks to my funders, thanks to all my students who helped me with this, Victoria University in Wellington, Regis, all my friends, all my students. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen if that's all right with you all. Is that good? You don't want to look at this anymore, right?
We totally want to see all the plant photos. I forgot who you're talking to. Oh my
you don't
goodness.
want to look at this slide anymore. You're done with this slide.
Just go back to the weird what was it, the nail wart.
Oh yeah, the nail wart. That's so great.
I love that.
We can go back to the nail wart.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take any
so
questions.
Much. Thank you so much. I just want to start by saying thank you so much. Obviously, this is the downside of Zoom, is you don't get to see all of our smiling faces and hear some applause, but thank you. And before you get bombarded with questions, I hope everyone is thinking of their questions and loading them in the chat right now while I distract you. I just want to put in a plug that if you need a new field partner for your next trip to New Zealand, you now have my contact information.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah. We're going in February. So
yeah, amazing. What?
And you know, Kristen, since we're in the meeting mode, let's see, am I muted? Can you guys hear
Nope.
me?
Yep.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Since, we can either leave this screen up, or since we're in the meeting mode, we can stop screen sharing and we can see each other. There we go.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
it.
So
Yeah. If we need to reference back any data, though, we'll just flip back. But
okay.
I do
Yeah,
want to
this
say,
makes it more like a sort of a meeting.
yeah,
We can all
I just
see
want
each
to.
other.
I just want to be careful. I love this. I love seeing everyone's faces, but please do not all unmute and start talking. I would like to still use the chat, and then we'll just go through them, and if we want to get some dialogue going, we'll just unmute sort of one by one as we do. As we'll go
Let's see. Yeah, Dave asked me if I had intersected with the Gloria project. Yeah, I sure have. Definitely when I was at Otago. So I was working with Cath Dickinson there and Sir Alan Mock, and they're both involved in Gloria. And then all the folks at CU, of course, Bill Bowman, Russ Monson, those were my postdoc advisors. And so I definitely know those folks. Haven't done much with Gloria in California, which is kind of weird because I did my, what?
Can you tell us what the Gloria?
Oh God, I'm so sorry. How rude. Yeah. What does Gloria stand for, Dave? I mean, I know what it is. It's this high elevation sort of global monitoring project. So it probably stands for what?
The acronym is Global Observational Research in Alpine Environments. And it's being run by UC, part of the White Mountain Research Station here. And they've got another one in Colorado. It might be on one of your 14ers. I don't know.
Yeah, there is one in Colorado. It's on Niwot Ridge. And so I actually did some of my other PhD work in the White Mountains of California, but I think this was before the Gloria got set up there because, you know, I'm older than I might seem on Zoom. So. Yeah, but I lived up there at Barcroft for a summer. That was a good time. So I would love to get involved with that project up there. I'll have to make some calls.
Yeah.
Have you, Jay, do you have experience working with them, David?
Yes, my wife and I went up there and did a rather interesting season up there doing transects. And in thunderstorms and God knows what else. So you keep rushing off the mountain when the lightning came down and fried your transect. But it was very interesting.
Were you at Barcroft or Crooked Creek?
Crooked Creek.
Oh, you were at Crooked Creek.
The one that's up highest, the one that
that's
they were
Barcroft.
going to.
Yeah.
That's Barcroft. Yes,
the Quonset hut.
Yes.
Yes. At one time, I had the record for running from Barcroft to the top of White Mountain. I'm sure that's been far surpassed by now, but we started doing stupid things like that when we were working there. That's really cool. Let's see, have you experimented with growing cushions for transplanting? Yeah, no, I haven't. Cushions are pretty difficult to grow. If you are a rock plant enthusiast, you're aware of this. Plus, to get to that field site on Mount Yale, it really, it's about a 3-hour backpack to get up there. And so it really wouldn't be very prudent to try to hike a bunch of plants up there. Even with the mules, that would really, that would be tough. So it certainly could be done. And I think if you had an area where you were closer to a road, that would be a pretty good idea. But I haven't done anything with that.
Cath, I love to put people on the spot and ask them this question. What's your favorite study plant that you have worked with? So what's your favorite cushion plant?
Oh man.
The worst question ever for a botanist.
No, you know, I will answer this the same way. I once asked my dad, not who his favorite kid was, because I'm an only child, but you know, what age did you like me the best? And he said, the age you are today, right today. So it's always the plant that I'm working on presently. So right now, yeah, it's got to be the Raoulia alboceracea. But my favorite cushion plant generally is definitely the Erythricium nanum, the Alpine forget-me-not. It is just that bright blue flower with a little yellow eye. It's a beaut. So it smells nice too. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous. Let's see. Would something like Eriogonum ovalifolium be a cushion plant? Ooh, Melissa, that's such a good question. Yeah. I mean, I might call it like a sub. I'd probably call that more of a subshrub. But yeah, it certainly got some cushiony aspects to it. Melissa, here's what you should do. You should put that name into the cushion plant database that I shared with you. I'll put that in the chat, and then we'll know if it's actually considered legit or not. So here, let me get that website for you.
That's a Great Basin White Mountain plant.
Oh yeah, no, I love it.
You don't know it.
And it has it gets carbon, doesn't it? No, that's not the one that blows up. What's the one that has the inflated? Is that Eriogonum inflatum? Help me out here, people. You know, the one with the, oh man, that's a cool plant.
Yeah, that's a cool plant.
Yeah. No, that ovalifolium is really pretty though. David Krause asks, do nitrogen fixer cushions such as Clover do better than others? Ooh, I don't know. And that's such a good question, David. You would expect that they would be even more facilitators than other plants. And I don't know. It's a great question. Somebody should know. There you go. You should go back and do another PhD. Fantastic.
Yeah, Cath, with all your connections in Colorado, don't you have anybody that is that's out there hiking and can give you like some photo updates on what's going on with your restoration trails?
Yeah, but that's not as fun as like me going there and like, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. And in fact, somebody said, well, why do you need to go there at all? You should just use drones. And like part of me was like, that's horrible. Like, I don't even want to be a botanist if I have to use drones. Like that just goes against everything that I love. So I'm sorry, if you're a drone user and lover, I'm sure they are great at collecting data in lots of different ways.
Actually, just a year ago, we had a speaker give a talk about how they're using drones in monitoring plant populations. And I think it's super cool. And it broke my heart a little because
yeah.
Yeah,
it's the wave of the future. I mean, I definitely see it, especially for areas like this. You really could, what would take me a week, I could probably do in a day. Just, driving a drone up there and with the right algorithms. Yeah.
That link, I don't know if anybody else tried it, but I'm trying it right now and it doesn't seem to be working.
It doesn't work. No.
Just me? I want to look at the database.
Oh, there's a rogue O that got on the end of that. I don't know
just
how that
EU.
happened. Yeah. I'll stick it in there again. Try that one. Hate it when that happens.
Okay. That one looks like it works, but I have insidious attack. I got one of those weird privacy error warnings. So I'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
That's
It's a
okay.
crazy European, it's legit.
Yeah.
I've been there. It won't wreck your computer. So at least that I know of. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I think it's because it's probably hosted by a European server. So all of our spyware doesn't recognize it.
Isn't it nice to know that you're like, you're a little renegade now looking at European cushion plant sites? You're going to be tracked by the FBI now. I hope not.
Bring it on. Bring it on. Okay. Well, I would love if anybody else had any other questions while we have your attention. I mean, what an epic career. I can't believe the awesome plants and the places that you've gotten to go and gotten to see. How awesome.
It was really great, but I am really curious. what you all think about restoration
right.
and you know, not necessarily cushion plants, but I have noticed a lot of the trails around here are right on the fall line, especially on like High School Hill. And I'm sure you all have your knowledge of where they happen like that. And it's so surprising. I thought, well, gosh, being so close to, you know, the city and being so close to Cal Poly, like engineering and, you know, landscape architecture, like shouldn't somebody be working on, you know, not having massive erosion of trails everywhere? But maybe I'm looking at it wrong. What am I missing? What do I not understand? Sure, a lot, but
Funding? I'm gonna say funding. That's my guess.
huh, okay.
I don't know. Cindy asked a good question though. I like that. So I'm gonna distract you with Cindy's
Oh
question.
yeah. What cool projects are you doing with Cal Poly students? That's well, Cindy, it's a long story. No, it's so I'm an associate dean, and so I'm, you know, basically an administrator now, and so I'm basically waiting for a student to be like, hey, will you be on my committee, and then I can sort of secretly work with them. Yeah, so I'm an advisor for a student in South Africa, actually doing some cushion plant work on one of the sub-Antarctic islands. So that's pretty cool. So I've sort of maintained this network of people and students, so I still get to have the pulse on what's happening, but don't really have any students right now. And I'm not doing any projects, which is sort of sad, but it's also exciting because I get to work on really big issues in the college, like diversity, equity, and inclusion for all students, which is really important to me. It's one of the reasons I took the position here. And I get to work on agriculture. And, you know, we all eat, and you know, how we farm is really important for the environment. And so, you know, cushion plants for me are, look, Regis was a teaching university, so I taught a lot. So my research was almost a passion project. You know, even the National Geographic grant, you know, it was thousands of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that's always the space in which I've operated. It was time to move on to something a little different, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still a botanist and out there working with plants and doing my business and restoring the trails.
Yeah.
San Luis Obispo. Yeah. And plant
Well,
some kitchen plants.
It sounds like we could use some of your expertise for a little bit of our local erosion that's going on. Really quick, Cindy accessed the database, and it looks like Eriogonum brevicale and Gilmanii are both in the database. Gilmanii does occur in California. It's a rare species, a listed species that occurs over, looks like in the White Mountains. I looked it up really quick.
Woohoo!
So
The Whites again.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, thanks for that in the chat. Yeah, I read about that Oceano Dunes project in the Cultivate magazine. But yeah, that's awesome. I want to help. I want to plant plants on the dunes.
Cath, Dave Chipping here. I was talking to the president of the Jimenez Ranch Foundation today. I'm president of the Friends of the Carrizo Plain, and we have funds, and they have funds to support student research. I have contacted the Bioscience Department, and they say that the current COVID system makes it too hard to communicate with students in regard to getting a research project going. But seeing you're in an administrative position, you might get some people from your end. So maybe at some time we should talk about us funding student research in the Carrizo Plain and the Jimenez Ranch area.
I would absolutely love that, David. I'm putting my email in the chat. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
Good
please.
connection.
Yeah, please contact me. That would be great. I'd love that.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
I'm glad Mike brought up the dune restoration too. She dropped off, but one of our members, Lindsay, who works for the local land conservancy, does a lot of restoration in the dunes also. She was here on the call, so she might be someone else to just be connected with. So
fantastic. Yeah, that is great.
Well, do we have any other questions for our lovely speaker this evening? right. Well, it's so good to see everyone's faces, but it might be time to let Cath go for the evening if there's no
Thank you all very much. Kristen, I hope I get to stay on the mailing list. Does that, if you present, does that mean you get to stay on the mailing list for future talks and stuff?
We'll
Will
have
you
to
send me a
figure out-
link for membership joining?
Yeah,
we'll
it's
do
just
that.
online. Okay,
We'll do
Yeah.
that, sure.
that'd be
Yeah.
great.
And
Me
thank
too.
you from me, Cath. Much appreciated. Your energy is very much appreciated.
Yes.
Good
We,
to
we
see
got some applause coming around here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Hey, Mike, I saw what you put in the chat. Just email me. I think I do have some sources. Yeah, DBG, Denver Botanic Garden, probably can get you some. I can probably get you some. So let's talk. So cool. Awesome. Hey, y'all. It was super fun. I love to talk about kitchen plants, as you can tell. Love to talk about plants generally. And it was a real pleasure to be with you. So thank you very much.
Yay. Thank you, Cath. We'll go on a hike.
Okay, it would be great, Kristen.
Yeah.
And
Bye.
thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Have a good night.